Now on CNN. It started innocently enough. One neighbor looking out for another.
A woman in the neighborhood saw what was going on and mistook it for a crime in progress, calling police, reporting 2 African-American men with backpacks trying to force their way in.
Turns out, one of those African-American men lived in the home, a prominent scholar and a friend of President Obama's. When the cops showed up, the trouble had just begun.
I was continuously telling him to calm down during this whole exchange because I really didn't want this either. I really didn't want to have to take such a drastic action because I knew that it was going to bring a certain amount of attention, unwanted attention on me. Nonetheless, that's how far Professor Gates pushed it and provoked and just wouldn't stop.
What it made me realize was how vulnerable all black men are, how vulnerable all people of color are, and all poor people to capricious forces like a rogue policeman.
One officer supporting Sergeant Crowley said he heard Gates say this.
This is how a black man is treated in America. A white woman calls the police and he gets arrested for breaking into his own home.
The case was basically dropped until this question to the president.
Recently, Professor Henry Louis Gates Jr. was arrested at his home in Cambridge. What does that incident say to you, and what does it say about race relations in America?
I don't know, not having been there and not seeing all the facts, what role race played in that. The Cambridge police acted stupidly in arresting somebody when there was already proof that they were in their own home.
From a simple arrest to a presidential smackdown to a defiant police department calling out the commander-in-chief.
As far as the president's comments, the governor's comments, and comments that I did not hear that our mayor made, I think when the time is right, they should make an apology to us. I think the president should make an apology to all law enforcement personnel.
I supported him. I voted for him. I will not again. I agree that I think it's admirable that he would speak on behalf of his friend, but he should have recused himself. He should have stepped back, and he should have said, I support my friend, but I don't have all the facts. I won't weigh in yet.
The president felt the pressure and a need to explain.
The fact that it has garnered so much attention, I think, is a testimony to the fact that these are issues that are still very sensitive here in America. So to the extent that my choice of words didn't illuminate, but rather contributed to more media frenzy, I think that was unfortunate.
He proposes a meeting at the White House. So what happens when the president, the professor, and the police officer sit down? Let's talk right now.
All right, let's talk. Why don't we? And we want you to weigh in as well. So if you can log on to any of the social media sites, we'll take your comments. First up, Emory University professor Andra Gillespie is here in our Atlanta studios. Writer and activist Tim Wise joins us from Nashville, and James Andrews is a blogger and a social media expert. He has written about many social issues, especially the present topic. He joins us now via Skype to tell us how to have this conversation online. You try to get as many people involved as possible. Okay, where should they start? Since I have you here, Andra, where do they start in their conversation, and where do we?
Well, for President Obama, Professor Gates, and Sergeant Crowley, they need to start to humanize one another. So when they meet, they need to figure out where they have common ground. They may be all married men, they may have children, they may share a love of the same sports. And once people get to see the common ground, then they can more delicately delve into a lot of the tough topics that they need to discuss about what happened and clear up the misunderstandings that transpired a week and a half ago.
Yeah, but are they still going to see each other? And I'll ask you this, Tim. When they walk into a room, are they going to see each other as, okay, here's the police officer, he's a white guy, here's a black guy who's the professor at the university, and then, here is the president who is black. Are they going to see, I know, people say we don't see race, but we all see race. We all see race.
Of course, but I mean, look, the issue is not, and I think we need to be clear about this, whether Sergeant Crowley is a racist or whether Professor Gates acted belligerently. My guess is Crowley's a fairly decent guy, and Professor Gates was angry for being accused of burglarizing his own home. The real issue that I think they need to talk about is not whether or not these individuals are bad or acted badly. The question is it possible that the initial caller, the witness, the woman who made the call, thought that this was a burglar because he was black in a way she wouldn't have had he been white? Is it possible that Sergeant Crowley, though he he is not, by all appearances, a bigot in any sense of the word, may have perceived Professor Gates's behavior as more belligerent than he would have had this been a white person. And the reason I ask that question is that we have about 20 to 30 years of social science research which says very clearly that white folks, whether they're cops or just average citizens, will oftentimes view the behavior of black people as more negative, more dangerous, more aggressive, even more criminal than they would the very same behavior engaged in by a white person. And they don't do that because they're bigots or racist or bad people, but because of internalized what are called implicit biases. They don't make us bad, but they happen. We need to have that conversation.
Well, I've got to say, as you were saying, as you said implicit biases, Andra was here mouthing the same words. And I'm sure there are people at home who are watching this going, come on, we hear this all the time. That's not true.
Well, Don, let me give you one real-world example that I think is perfect. In the early 90s, I lived in New Orleans, Louisiana. I was 22, 23 years old, just out of college. One day, I locked myself out of my car. I was trying to break into the car using a coat hanger. A cop drove up, got out of his car, and instead of asking me, hey, is this your car? He didn't ask for proof. He didn't say a word except, you know, you're doing that wrong. Let me show you the proper way to break into a vehicle. He then proceeded to pull out a Slim Jim and try to break into my car for me. Now, anybody who thinks that a 22 or 23-year-old black man in this country would have had that experience is either insane or they are high.
And okay, Tim, I got to tell you, growing up in Louisiana, in Baton Rouge, not far from New Orleans, right. I would get stopped as a young man in my parents' nice car. My parents were professionals, and they would say, where did you get this car? And I'd have to show all of the identification about where, you know, my parents' car, and then they'd call my parents. So, so that's a completely different experience. James, I'm not sure if you have that experience as well. You've written about this online. You can talk to us about your experience or what you have been hearing folks saying online in the social media.
Sure. In my experience, you know, I grew up, my mother was Italian, my grandfather was a German-born Jew, and my father's West Indian. So, but I too have been on the ground, you know, by the police, you know, pulled over for no reason. What I'm seeing online and what we've been doing and hearing in conversations are people talking. And the thing about the online space is it gives people sort of, it gives them a space to talk about things, but sometimes not share who they are. And for white people, I think we've heard a lot of vocal voices. If you look at the Boston Globe and the story, you see a lot of angry white people that are upset by Professor Gates. I think this is a moment in time. This is a moment in history where we can galvanize. The White House needs to use social media to open up this dialogue and not make it about those three individuals, but make it about an open town hall discussion forum.
Yeah, but you know, I see a lot of angry black people as well who are angry at Sergeant Crowley, who are saying, you know what, absolutely. And I met him personally, and do I think he's a bigot from meeting him personally? No, I don't. I was not at the house. I don't know what's going on. I'm sure the truth is somewhere in the middle. We're not really discussing that. That's just a catalyst to get this conversation going. We want to talk more about this conversation and how we bring some resolution to this, a solution.